we hope to be, I hope we are, dynamic in this church. And I don't mean dynamic in that everybody's doing motion. I mean dynamic in the sense that we allow God to speak into moments and that we really are looking for that. We're not just going through the motions of showing up for church on a Sunday and saying, oh, well, here we are again, and we go through the motions of the songs and the sermons, and then we come to the point wherein we go home and the next Sunday rolls around and everything remains as it was. I don't want that, personally. And we've seen already, and I think it's happened a lot more than we've seen, wherein Ed has a dream, and then that dream is related to all of us here. And there's a point at which God is using one of us in the way that He would use anyone. Elijah, Elisha. I don't mean to compare us with those people, but they were, just as James says, Elijah was just a man like you and I, and he prayed that it wouldn't rain, and it didn't rain. So I want us to see this dynamism in that God speaks now. He does. The revelation has ceased in terms of the Bible, but that doesn't mean that God is done speaking. And so Winston came to me last Sunday, and he was very patient, I must add, because I was talking to somebody else, and Winston waited and waited and waited until finally he said, Rip, I've had a dream, and through that dream, Ezekiel, the name Ezekiel, just kept coming to me. And he said, I don't know what it means, but that was it. And so I thought, gosh. So the whole week I thought, what would I do that would be a place in which I could just say, okay, everybody think about Ezekiel, and then maybe God will speak to you. But I don't think that would be right. So I said, I'm going to go to Ezekiel, I'm going to read Ezekiel, and then I'm going to craft a sermon from Ezekiel. So we're going to take a detour from the book of Acts. I like going through books. But we're going to take a detour because, again, I think it's important that we are dynamic. And I would say this to everybody in this room. If at any point in your week or your life, you have a sense that God is saying something to you that is important for us to hear, I want you to think on that. And then determine in your mind how it is you think that it would be best that what you think or believe God is saying to you would be something that we could all hear. I really mean that. I'm not saying that just to make people feel good. It's important because Jesus is alive and He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, according to the Bible we're reading. If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, and I have to take mine away from the bookmark, turn it to Ezekiel chapter 4. This is where we're going to spend our time today. Now, this time that's spoken of in this text, Ezekiel is a contemporary of Jeremiah. And Ezekiel primarily was concerned with speaking into the southern kingdom, Judah. And it's the time just prior to the Babylonian captivity. Both Ezekiel and Jeremiah are warning of this coming captivity. Nebuchadnezzar is coming. Nabopolassar, his father, has already come to the northern kingdom, and the deportations have begun. Judah is laid siege to, and Jerusalem is laid siege to specifically when Nebuchadnezzar, Nabopolassar's son, takes the throne, and he is coming. And so this is where the time in which Ezekiel prophesies speaks to. So let's take a look at this in chapter 4. I'm going to read. It's a long text. I apologize for that, but I think you'll see that there was no way to shorten it. Chapter 4, verse 1. God speaking to Ezekiel, Now, son of man, take a clay tablet and put it in front of you and draw the city of Jerusalem upon it. Lay it siege to it. Erect siege works against it. Build a ramp up to it. Set up camps around it. Put battering rams around it. And then take an iron pan and place it as an iron wall between you and the city. And turn your face toward the city. It will be under siege. You will besiege it. And this will be a sign to the house of Israel. Lie on your left side. Put the sin of the house of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. For 390 days you will bear the sin of the house of Israel. After you've finished lying on that side, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the house of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year. Turn your face toward the siege of Jerusalem and your bared arm and prophesy against her. I will tie you up with ropes so that you can't turn from one side to the other until you finish the days of your siege. Take wheat and barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. You are to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day and eat it at set times. Measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. Eat the food as you would a barley cake. Bake it in the sight of the people, using human excrement for fuel. The Lord said, in this way the people of Israel will eat defiled food among the nations where I will drive them. Then I said, not so, Lord. I have never defiled myself. From my youth till now, I have never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No unclean meat has ever entered my mouth. Very well, the Lord said, I will let you bake your bread over cow manure instead of human excrement. Then God said to me, Son of man, I will cut off the food supply for Jerusalem. People will eat ration food in anxiety and drink ration water in despair. And food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. Now, Son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. Take set scales and divide the hair. When the days of your siege come to an end, burn 1/3 of the hair with fire inside the city. Take 1/3 and strike it with the sword all around the city, and scatter 1/3 to the wind, for I will pursue them with a sword. But take a few strands of hair and tuck them away again in the folds of your garment. Again, I will take a few of these and throw them into the fire and burn them up. A fire will spread from here to the whole house of Israel. This is what the sovereign Lord says. This is Jerusalem, which I have set in the center of the nations and the countries all around her. Yet with her wickedness she has rebelled against my laws and decrees more than all of the nations and countries around her. She has rejected my laws and not followed my decrees. Now this is a terrible prophecy. I mean, it's just terrible. And poor Ezekiel, can you imagine being commissioned like this? To do this, to make your life and your body an illustration as to what God is going to do to your nation. I just think, good grief. So let's just take each one of these signs, as they are called here. And what do they mean? The sign of the brick, the clay. That's to represent the city. And Ezekiel was commissioned to lay siege to it. All right, what happened? Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. And when he breached the walls, he burned it. He burned the temple, destroyed the city, killed thousands of people with the sword. Just what Ezekiel said would happen. What does the iron pan mean? God said, take an iron pan and put it in front of your face and look at the city. What does that mean? That is Ezekiel in the place of God, looking at the city with an iron pan in front of his face. And he's saying to Jerusalem, you can cry out to me when all this is going on, but there's a wall of iron between me and you. I'm not going to hear you. Lie on your left side, lie on your right, face one way, face the northern kingdom for 390 days, representing the number of years. We forget. We see this prophecy, we think Israel went into some kind of little bad behavior for a short period of time. This has been going on for a very long time. You go all the way back to the time of Hezekiah, when Judah was being besieged by Assyria. Assyria had already besieged the northern kingdom and carried away tens of thousands of Jews into a deportation. And then the Assyrians had come into the northern kingdom and intermarried. This is what you see as the beginning of the tension between Judah and Samaria. Why were the Samaritans looked at as mongrels? Go all the way back to the 700s BC, and you see why they were seen as mongrels, because they intermarried with unclean people according to the way in which they've been taught. He's bound with ropes, Ezekiel is, so that he cannot escape this siege. I got to tell you, we don't realize in this environment what siege warfare is like. It is the cruelest form of warfare there is. Far better that the troops just come in and kill a bunch of people all at once. When you had your city laid siege to, in this time of history, a city was like a little fortress, and it was walled in. And when armies would come and they wanted to conquer your city, the walls would keep them out. That's what the walls were there for. The problem was it made you vulnerable to another kind of warfare, which was siege warfare. And they would encamp around it. You see where he says build ramps up to the walls? They would camp around it, set archers everywhere, and they would build these ramps under the cover of archers. It'd take them sometimes, Alexander the Great laid siege to cities sometimes for years. So they would starve the people out in that city-state. No supplies could come in. Now you have to realize this is Israel. This is Mesopotamia. It's very dry. There's a limited amount of wood, so you've got to cook food over something. If you're starved out, if you're cut off, you can't go out and gather anything to burn for fuel to cook your food. And so what were they going to cook it over? Well, it was a common practice in that part of the world, as it still is in sub-Saharan Africa today, to cook food over, they use elephant dung. Israel saw that, rightly so, as an unclean way of cooking food. By kosher law, you weren't supposed to do that. But now they're reduced to doing it. And the horror of it was, God initially said over human waste. That's just incredible to me. But it stunk. When you cook food over that cow manure. Now, how many of you, I know we've all had barbecues in our homes or at our houses, use certain kinds of wood for certain kind of taste. Stop and think what it means to cook over cow dung. God was saying to them, I'm going to make you eat food that's unclean, because there'll be nothing else to eat. And if you go back and read in the history of this particular era, the famine was so great. And Ezekiel, if you keep reading, it prophesies this, that children were eaten. Their own children, their own parents, people were eating each other because there was nothing to eat. We live in such a sanitized world today. We don't have a clue what this is like. Every detail of this was given to illustrate something. For instance, we don't even notice this in the text, but the bread that he was to bake, which was only 8 ounces. If you go back and what's known as metrology, where you work out the weights and measures of the hin and the shekels, 8 ounces of cake and 1/6 of a quart of water was what he had to eat and drink each day. To share in, to say, this is what it's going to be like. You will go out and you will drink water. My wife and I have been to the Bahamas a couple of times. And we don't go to the big islands where all the hotels and everything are. We go to the ones where it's undeveloped. They don't have any water. They have to bring it all in on a truck. And so you go to the grocery store and you buy this jug of water with a hand pump on it, and that's your water. That is all the potable water you have while you're there. And that's a small thing. We're obviously not suffering in the Bahamas. But it really, I remember my Aunt Joyce saying to me, boy, it really makes you appreciate that we just turn on a spigot and have water that we can drink. When you have to pump and you just see it going down every day, going down, 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 till you have to go back to the store and buy another jug of water. They're going to have, think of what it means to drink water, not knowing if that's the last glass of water you're going to get for a long time. The shaved head cuts the hair up, and the shaved beard, which was a humiliation for the Jew. If you shaved your head and your beard, you were in repentance and mourning. Every Jew understood that. But he takes the hair, divides it into thirds, and he says, God says, take this third and burn it in the fire. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to burn this city's going to be burned. And people are going to die. And this siege is going to be like a fire spreading through this city slowly, because people are going to starve. Another third, he says, chop it up. What does that mean? It means the swords are coming. The spears and the swords are coming. And you're going to be pursued. You're going to be cut down. And then the third portion is scatter it to the wind, which is exactly what happened when Nebuchadnezzar, following after the pattern of many kings before him, took tens of thousands of Jews and hauled them away. to a land that wasn't theirs. Now, this terrible story, I mean, it's a terrible story. I don't even like this kind of stuff. If I were God, none of this would be in the Bible for me. I would say, don't, the flood, the prophecies about the wars, the rapes, the pillaging, all this terrible stuff, I would leave it out. Because it seems to be so contradistinctive to God's character. It just makes no sense to me until I really consider what's going on. Why is God so angry? Well, if you keep reading, he tells them why he's angry. Because of your apostasy and your idolatry. And we think, well, gosh, that's harsh. I mean, why would just being apostate and idolatrous be so bad? Again, we live in a very sanitized world. We're all up in arms, the evangelical church is, and the Catholic Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. We're all up in arms over all of the various threats to morality that we see in our country today. The LGBT community, what they're demanding of us, redefinition of marriage, all of this. Girls and guys kissing each other on TV, and we're during the prime time family hour that's just there it is. And we're all upset. Abortion, terrible. Oh, we're all phoned up. That is baby food compared to this era of history. The pagan nations at that era in history, we think about, say for instance, one of the worst crimes in our country right now in the Western world is pedophilia. Terrible pederasty. We do not accept it in any form. That's just how they lived. If you were a part of a pagan nation, you happily went to the pagan temple, to Marduk or whoever it was you worshiped, and there would be children in there subjected to prostitution as temple prostitutes in the temple. It was part of the worship service. You had no compunction whatever, if you're a worshiper of Molech, having your children taken from you, and you gave them up to be thrown into a fire alive. We don't see anything like that here today. That's the times in which they lived. Those are the times. And the Jews in both kingdoms had fallen into these practices, and they've been doing it for a very long time. So it's not that suddenly some people just started going awry and God had to put his foot down. This had been going on for a long time. Now I want to ask all of us to think about this for a moment. We say, oh, that is so harsh. How could God do that? That just seems disproportionate. Ask yourself, what could God do? If he does nothing, it's as much as saying, I'm endorsing what you're doing. Keep on. It's kind of like we want God to be this grandpa in the sky that chuckles when he sees us going awry and says, well, as long as they're having a good time, don't worry about it. That's the alternative. But if God is holy and if he's just, at some point something has to happen that stops this cycle. Now I want to ask us now, here we are in the 21st century of America, and we've got those signs, I pass them every Sunday and every Wednesday coming over to Manor, where you see on the church sign, God bless America. Can he? Can he? Can he endorse what we are fully? We see this prophecy and it's terrible. And I got to tell you, I take no pleasure in preparing sermons like this at all. I want to take the sermons that are all about God's mercy and his goodness and his interaction with us in relationship, and I want to talk about that. But that's not the whole story. Let me ask you a question. Who in this room, as a parent, just place your lab coat on and say, okay, I'm a parent with small children. I know a family right now, I'm not going to say where they are or who they are. And this family, the parents are allowing their children to do whatever they want. And there is trouble out the yin-yang in this family. And it's caused by the parents' attitude toward life, and now it's being reflected in the children. One of the things the children say is, it's awesome. Your parents are awesome. Their friends are saying to the children, your parents are awesome, because they don't get after anybody. They don't get angry with us. We can do whatever we want. Now, none of us in this room would endorse that as a good practice for parenting. Nobody. Why do we think that God can endorse us doing whatever we want and not at any point say, can't keep going this way. I've got to put a stop to it. That's exactly what was going on in the southern and the northern kingdoms when Ezekiel had his time of prophetic work. 22 years he prophesied. Now, do our national morals, would you say that our national morals on the whole align with God's morals? I'm not saying, answer me, and I'm not saying sit down on a sheet of paper and work out a metric to discover the balance here. See, we see everything in terms of scales, and God doesn't see things that way. You break one part of the whole law is broken. And I just think what God says, if you go further and further into the workings of the writings of Ezekiel, he says this in chapter 8, therefore I'll deal in my wrath, my eye will not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. Man. And we think, that's the Old Testament. I mean, really. It's the Old Testament. I want to say today to you and to me, and I say this to myself, don't mishear me. There is sin in my life. I'm not without sin at all. I mean, I can tell you honestly, and I say this with shame, that when I'm in the pew singing, when Lottie is leading the singing, and for 1 or 2 seconds I'm reflecting on the majesty of the words in the hymns, but then my mind drifts off to places where it shouldn't go. And then I come up here. So don't ever think for a minute that Rip Snow has something going for him that you don't have going for you. In both directions, toward God and away from him. But I say, this is revolting, this is terrible. I don't want to think about God this way. We forget God is, take the parent imagery for just a moment. Why? I remember being in church one day. A friend of mine had really small children, small as Jackson. We were 2 and 3 and 4 years old. And the little kid was running on the sidewalk outside the building. And the father said, stop running. And the kid froze, And you don't run at church. And I thought, boy, man, you're not picking your battles very well. I'm thinking to myself. Why did he want the kid to stop? Was it that it's bad, intrinsically bad to run on the sidewalk outside the church? No. Was it that he was causing trouble for anybody? Nobody was tripping over him. He wasn't doing anything but just being a kid. I'll tell you why he said it. Because he was embarrassed. My child's misbehaving. I'm embarrassed. Don't ever think that God is like that. He doesn't need this world to be. He doesn't need this universe in order for him to be complete and happy. He has brought this world to be and us in it because he wanted us here. He's not embarrassed when we misbehave. God's reputation, you see this event in the life of Israel, and the first question that comes to my mind is Moses. Standing in front of God, God says to Moses, okay, that's it, I've had it. I'm wiping them all out. I'm going to start over with you. And Moses says, no, Lord. If you do that, the nations around us will say, look at what the Lord has done. Your name will be impugned. Your reputation will be impugned. Don't ever think God cares about his personal reputation. He's God. He's not embarrassed. So that brings us to the question, why do these things happen? And why would God judge? It's not for his good. It's not to save him from embarrassment. It's for our good, always. Judgment is a blessing. We never see it that way. I don't. But it's a blessing. We look at the bedside of, say, Lucy, and I'm not saying this is judgment. Don't mishear me. We go to the bedside of Lucy Rance, who's in a coma. Her parents, she was not a believer. Now, I'm not saying that's God doing that. Please don't misunderstand. Is where she is right now, is it a blessing? It could be. Some things are worse than death. Some things are worse than disease. Some things are worse than judgment. You and I are in this room today, and every one of us 70 years from now will no longer be here on this earth. We will all face that moment wherein we leave this world, and we will do it alone. Judgment may be the only way that God can save a few. We forget that. This is a hard sermon. I apologize I'm not a harsh person. I'm a nice person. I don't like this kind of theme. But there it is. You read it for yourself and you decide what it's saying to you. I'm just going to leave us with a question today. How seriously do we take our lives before the Lord? Look around in this room. How many people are here? How seriously do we take our lives before the Lord? Do we look at our relationship with God as something merely to make us feel better? Or do we really take that relationship seriously as a cause for life? I don't know where